Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Pre-Construction Collaboration in Healthcare Leads to Growth. My name is Cindy Salmons, and I am the Marketing Coordinator in the Business Development Department at AGC of America. I now would like to introduce to today's speakers, Julie Huval. She is the Head of Marketing at Beck Technology. Along with her is Douglas Lee, Vice President and Pre-Construction Operations Manager with Brasfield Gorrie, and Trent Isaacson, Vice President of Pre-Construction with Layton Construction. Thank you all for being with us today. I'll now turn the presentation over to Julie to begin the webinar.
All right, thank you, Cindy, and welcome everyone. You may think that this is a little bit different AGC webinar than maybe you've seen in the past. We don't have a presentation today because this is a conversation about healthcare and pre-construction. So I am playing the role of moderator. I have two wonderful subject matter experts with me on this call. So I'm gonna be playing the role of moderator and color commentary. But Douglas and Trent, I'm so glad that you are both here with me today. And I want you to share, Douglas, I'm gonna ask you to go first, of why should the audience trust you about what you're about to say about pre-construction and healthcare? What gives you clout to be here today?
Just besides being super charming and brilliant, I have been in the industry for almost 30 years, 20 something, 25 or so. And the first 15 or 20 were strictly in healthcare. And the last 10 or 12 of those were in healthcare pre-construction. So been around a while. I guess that comes with getting old. But I've gotten to play with a lot of teams and interact in a lot of different delivery models, work with a lot of teams all over the, well, most of the country. So hope that helps.
All right. Well, if anyone has any qualms about you being on this call, put it in the chat and I'll ask him. Trent, same question. What makes you a trustworthy person to be in this conversation to talk about pre-con and healthcare?
Well, much like Douglas, my career spans coming up on 3 decades. That's hard to believe that the time has gone by so fast, but most of that has been focused on healthcare, especially the past 20 years at Layton Construction. That's all I've done is healthcare pre-construction across the country, multiple clients, different places, including California with OSHPD or HCI as it's currently being called. So yeah, we've seen the kind of the full gamut of delivery methods and have participated heavily in those pre-construction and operational efforts on projects from nasty renovations to brand new greenfield hospitals that don't come up that often, but we certainly drool when we see those. Those are some nice projects. So yeah, it's been a great career for me, and healthcare is something I've really loved, and it's great people that work in that industry. So yeah, it's been really good.
Awesome. Okay, let's jump into the meat of today's conversation. And what I want us to first think about is, I'm going to ask you to say, what is your biggest success story with healthcare pre-construction? And, is it from pre-construction? It may not always be the final project. Maybe it's the process of how the project comes to be. So I'm going to reverse it now. So Trent, I'm going to ask you to answer that one first. What is your biggest success story with a healthcare project?
Yeah, I'm going to go to some recent history. And a true case study. Just April of 2020, we were awarded a project in Tacoma, Washington, a children's hospital, and as you all know, that was the very beginnings of pandemic and kind of the world exploding as we knew it. And we were tasked at that point in an integrated true IPD, a multi-party agreement to deliver a project for a certain budget for a certain scope. And through our pre-construction effort, the world kind of blew up further with escalation, and so significant challenges that came about because of what has happened. We sit today, actually, we start demolition and some make-ready projects next week. And so we're finally at a point of starting construction. And through that 3-year process, we were able to maintain the budget, if you can believe that, and the scope. That caused some significant hurdles that we had to cross. And both from the client side as well as from all the design and construction professionals on the table, it really took some great collaboration. In fact, we kind of reset about halfway through that because of the significant escalation we were experiencing and had to rethink the approach to the project. And you know, the success came because of the multi-parties, the kind of the collaboration that was there. Had that not have happened, the project probably would have been upset in greater ways. And you know, right now we're tracking to a great point. Our budget is holding. The program is being delivered as was anticipated. A lot of the kind of fun elements that go into a children's hospital are still being incorporated, and you know, the design is going to be pretty cool when we're done. And so everybody's happy, and then that can be, you know, one of the indicators of how well the project is moving along, is we're still getting along and collaborating as we intended to do. And so, you know, it kind of speaks to that healthcare delivery model that is often wants to be very collaborative and involve people at an early stage to get to the best outcome. And in this case, I think our client was part of that. They kind of caught the vision of that integrated process and recognized that they were going to have to rethink their approach to the project as well to help us all be successful. So technology was a big piece of that as we were working and continue, despite the you know, the lifting of restrictions over the past year or more. We continue to work mostly virtually, as design consultants and contractors and owners tend to be sitting in different places, and so that's been actually a very productive format for us, and that's kind of a success as we think about it as well. So that, yeah, I think, you know, that integrated approach is, if I think back on my career, the integrated approach is where you tend to feel most accomplished in what you've done. And where, you know, relationships are developed in deep ways. And at the end of the day, you know, you're kind of all satisfied with what has happened. Everybody's, you know, hopefully made their profit that they were hoping, and a product was delivered to a client. And, you know, ultimately that's the cool thing about healthcare, is you think about the end users that are benefiting from that facility, and you know, everybody comes away win-win-win. And that integrated process lends itself to that.
Okay, so I'm just going to recap what you said. You started a project at the beginning of the pandemic. You maintained the budget in the scope. You had to rethink through it all as inflation, material costs, things happened. And you had a project owner that was bought into the vision of an integrated process.
Yep, 100%. You nailed it.
Okay. We're going to come back to all of that because that sounds almost too good to be true, but also an amazing story. So, Douglas, what is your biggest success story in healthcare?
So I'm going to give you 2 examples, and they're very similar to Trent's. First one was a personal kind of success story in that I got challenged in 2006, 2007 with our first integrated project by a very pivotal owner who just felt like our delivery system was broken. And so I'd learned so much on that project just because I was challenged to do things differently and the approach to it differently. Construction became fun again. And I'm sure Trent felt that as well. So it's not any easier. In fact, it's probably harder. But that approach where you kind of lock arms when it works and you face problems on the other side of the table versus, I mean, construction's always going to have issues, right? There's going to be things that are anomalies. But to be with a team member, finding the issues and coming up with really cool solutions versus adversarial, and then also trying to resolve issues. It's a paradigm shift, and it made it fun, and it was equally hard, but it was good. And I think Trent mentioned it, that it was the relationships we had from that team. I mean, that was, several years ago. I still keep in contact with them monthly. And so then our second round of that with the same client was probably our most successful project. But again, it was that one was at the 2000. The project died in the middle of the Great 2009, and we got another shot at it in 2010, 11, came back. So we got to get back together and attack a project in Las Vegas, and it was a lot of fun. Again, equally hard, but man, just we solved some problems in so many unique ways, and again, just forged some relationships that I'll carry forever. And so that, I would say, those were probably our two most successful projects for.
So Douglas, I mean, it sounds like you like to be challenged to do things differently. So like, do you do the crossword puzzle every morning? Like, are you one of those people like challenge me, and that's where you thrive?
Well, I mean, it's kind of how I ended up in this role as an operations manager. That's kind of my gig at Brasfield Gorrie Preconstruction, to continuously check and see how are we doing what we do, and make sure that we're leveraging best practices across 150 recon managers and 10 officers. And so, are we being consistent? Are we doing things the right way? So I get excited about that.
That's awesome. That's great to hear. All right. Douglas, I'm going to ask you to answer this one first. What are some of the biggest challenges facing healthcare pre-construction today, and how can they be addressed?
It's interesting. So I don't think that the things that are challenging healthcare pre-construction necessarily are unique to healthcare pre-construction. I think it's our industry as a whole. And I see right now, everybody is stretched really thin. We are working on razor thin margins, and I see it in the design community. I see it in the community. I see it in the builders and the clients. And so trying to make things work is tough, especially with the trades right now. They are over-promised across the board, and so making commitments at the right time based on the right terms and all those things, and get them on board, and then navigating the logistics issues that are plaguing, things just not being available when and then that kind of leads to the other thing, and we both mentioned it in kind of a sideways term, but trust. I think trust is something that is so rare in our industry, and that's what made those jobs so much fun, is that we were able to forge relationships, and a lot of the extra work that goes into trying to navigate when you don't trust somebody kind of fell away. And so that's what makes it fun. You're not having to do the extra pieces that go kind of covering yourself when that's just kind of fall away when you trust the people. And you don't have to have that delivery model, but you do have to have a relationship where you trust the other person. And that's tough in construction and design and trades and all those things.
Trust seems to be one of those things too, as we have this fluid moving industry, and even seems to be more fluid these days. Of you tell someone, hey, this is going to be the cost of a project, this is what we think we can do it for, and then things change, And then someone may be coming back to ask you, like, why did all this stuff change? Like, you've got to be on your toes of, you know, material costs have changed. That crew that we thought we were going to have, you know, things change with that. So that trust is a big issue. And man, when it's tough, I get it. This is a tough industry, and it's very much built on relationships. Trent, what about you? Do you have the same takeaways as Douglas, or do you want to combat him on some of the things he talked about?
Yeah, I'd say Douglas kind of has nailed it pretty much. I'd add a little bit to what he said. You know, the limited resource of labor is truly it's a big challenge for contractors right now. And I don't know that it's just contractors. I think the design professionals are feeling that as well, that there's just the resource is limited. And you know, I think the productivity from laborers on up to professionals is maybe not what it was pre-pandemic. And in some ways, that's maybe a good thing as we've all kind of reset and restocked about what's important in our lives. And so there's some adjustment to that's happening. It doesn't alleviate the pressure, though, that we all feel in terms of delivering a project on time and on budget. And so those things are competing a little bit. And one of the biggest challenges that I've seen in our industry in recent years, and I've felt and known this was coming for a good long while, is just that limited labor resource of skilled tradespeople. Especially, there's just not enough electricians, not enough plumbers, not enough carpenters to go around to get all this work done. And even as the economy slows a little bit, I think it's going to continue to be a problem that we feel. And effort from all of us needs to be kind of focused in how do we alleviate that. And I think it comes in a couple of ways. I think we you know, some initiatives to get younger people excited about a trades position. You know, for decades, you know, our parents, you know, from the day we were in kindergarten, focused at like, let's get to college and, you know, let's build a career that way. And you know, for some of us that's great, but for others, you know, an electrician, that's a great way to make a living. And some folks would be a lot happier than sitting in behind a desk, you know, being outside and seeing a project come together. So I think that's one of the solutions. And then you know, technology is going to be the other way that we start to win and gain on some of that in managing ourselves a little better with you know, some of those on-site things that are monitoring productivity and work in place. Doxel's one that we're using currently that is great for that. And so, you know, the appropriate use of technology, prefabrication, all of that wants to help alleviate that stress, but it's going to take the entire community of construction professionals to kind of get us across the board. And then, you know, as a whole, in healthcare especially, I've seen the delivery of projects wanting to shift to an integrated project delivery method of some kind. And as Douglas mentioned, the idea of trust there is super important. And going back to that children's hospital that I talked about, I think that's one of the reasons that project was successful. The client first started to trust us, and the Layton Construction and the key design members had all worked together many times before. And so we kind of already had that level of trust with one another, but we took it to another level. We laid our cards on the table, kind of showed, you know, how our books, opened up our books, showed our overhead, our profit and everything. And the challenge I see going forward though is bringing the subcontractors into that mix, and helping clients to recognize that they're key parts to that. And especially the key subcontractors, the MEP trades, drywall and framing in a hospital, you know, those are critical trades to have on board at an early stage, and helping them to kind of break down silos and recognize that you know, I can be more successful by helping the plumber, and not just trying to maximize my work that I can put in place for myself. And if we all get across this finish line in a good way, that only lends to my profitability at the end of the day. So that's a bit of a paradigm shift. You go back, you know, a few decades earlier on in my career, that was definitely not the case. Even as we started to break away from the old traditional hard bid delivery methods, it's still kind of been very siloed, and people have been reluctant to share information and to bring all the good ideas to the table. So you know, that's a challenge that I continue to see and feel is how can we be collaborative? How can we share information? And how can we keep each other accountable? Sometimes there's that in that trust and openness that there's a loss of accountability. People just are reporters of kind of information. Hey, the cost went up, and here's the reasons why. But you know, we don't want that either. We want to, you know, can keep ourselves competitive and you know, deliver the project for a good value.
So both of you talked about trust. We've also talked about resources are limited and really working with subcontractors. So along that line, and we also have some subcontractors as part of this audience today. What's one or two things that you can tell either another general contractor out there or a subcontractor of how do you build trust with a project team? Do you have any good, like, do this one thing, do these two things? Do you have the silver bullet, or do you have a couple of suggestions?
It's a great question. You know, I think the way to trust is it begins with from that early phase of budgeting and recognizing, you know, on both sides of the table that the right answer maybe is not the lowest cost answer, right? That may not be the right solution that everybody's looking for. But the way that we get some trust in what you're telling us is let's you know, let's peel the curtain back and you know, let's look at the quantities, let's look at the unit rates. Let's get very granular and detailed in how we're approaching budgeting on this project in terms of resources as well, you know, the people that you're going to bring to the table. And that kind of starts to build the relationship of trust that we can, you know, recognize that there's you know, not information that's being withheld, that the financial aspect of everybody's interested in making each other some money. And I mean, we're at the end of the day, we're all in this to do that. If not, we'd all go fishing, right? So it's I think that's the first step is just even in that initial budgeting to kind of lay the cards on the table and you know, reveal where we're at and where we think we're going, and you know, it starts to build from there.
Like it, Douglas. Any tips?
Yeah, I think Trent's right. I think transparency is the first form of caring, right? So if you can show a little vulnerability and offer some trust to others, and I think that begets some trust and some political capital on that front. Also think one of the things that I was challenged early on with, and I really didn't understand it until later, but it was developing some personal relationships. It's much harder to be upset with somebody when you kind of understand why and how they say, do, think, make decisions the way they do. And so while our first integrated project, we carved out time by almost by force from the folks that were coaching us. We were like, oh, we need to be productive, let us go work. And they were like, no, you need to spend some time understanding who you're working with. And so once you kind of understand somebody's story and you kind of figure out kind of how and who they are, it's much harder to your knee-jerk reaction to be kind of that same old, like, oh, this person's out to get me, or they're hiding something, or they've got some ulterior motive. You kind of understand. And it's harder to mislead somebody if you know them on a personal level. And so using some different tools and ways of kind of forcing some of those interactions was a big deal to establishing that trust early on, especially with people that you've never worked with before. I think Trent mentioned having some iterations with some team members can generate that trust. You're kind of like building an NFL team on Saturday and expect them to go out on Sunday and be really cooperative, collaborative and all that, but yet we do that every day in construction. We build our NFL team on Saturday with the cheapest folks we can find, and we're out on the field there. Why is this all going sideways? What's up? It's just how we bring team members on, and we engage with them, we get them on. It's fairly broken industry, so that's one of the things about that delivery model.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm going to pile on there for just a second. You know, I think when you feel like your teammates got your back in some way, that's a major step towards trust. You know, a designer that points out to you from a very early stage, hey, there's this component of the project that's got my attention. I keeps keeping me up at night, and you know, I want to share this with you so that maybe I don't have to stay up thinking about it by myself, for starters, but also it kind of gets you aligned. And I'm not surprising you with this issue 6 months from now, when budgets have been set and schedule is, you know, kind of laid out. And at that point, it's everybody's disappointed with what happens there. So, you know, I recognize and getting people aligned with you is a key element to that trust. And you know, the team analogy is that Douglas used there was perfect. You know, recognize it's hard to get together one day and play the Super Bowl the next. So some experience with one another certainly helps in all of that.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. It was like the owner on that first project, he was like, I know you got a number in mind. He goes, I need you to tell the team what you think this is worth. And we were very early, and I was like, I'm not sharing the number. We were in the middle of a meeting, it's the first time I've seen it, and he was like, I know you got a number. And I'm like, man, this number becomes a boat anchor for the next 9 months if I share the right now. And you're going to tie that boat anchor around my neck, and I get to wear it like a medallion forever. And he's like, man, that is our, kind of to your point, that team member's got your back, and he had to kind of set the stage to where it was okay sharing in that level. And not all team members are gifted in setting an environment where it's safe to do that, and safe to share your expertise. We're all brought to the room for a reason. We get there by accident. Most of the time, I stumble into a few of them every now and then, but for the most part, we earn our way in there. And so it's like, share what you're gifted at doing and create an environment where it's safe to do that. Can be tough.
Yeah. You know, we could keep going on this one, so you're gonna have to stop us. But you know, it extends to the client side as well. That kind of transparency is important. That it is established up front. It's really good when you know what the real budget is, not their first wagon trying to get themselves a low number per se, but what is the budget, and then, you know, we can all start to truly say, is it feasible? Can we get there with what's being currently contemplated or not? And it doesn't pit, you know, each other. It doesn't pit us against one another of us trying to look attractive with a low number, and them kind of knowing that, hey, I got more money, but I really don't want to give it to you. You know, it starts to get some alignment there, and that can be a tricky equation. You know, I get both sides of the coin that you know, every one of us has got budgets that we work to in some way or another, and trying to manage those dollars can be a challenge, and maximizing it, especially in today's world. So, but that collaboration, openness, transparency, you know, needs to happen with everybody, and that's how I've seen teams be the most successful.
That's really good points. And I think it's also one of those things in this industry, we all think we have the secret sauce. We don't want to share too much, because then that may trip us up on the next project or with that next teaming opportunity. But also, it's not sharing all the secret sauce, but also building trust and building that relationship, so we can all not only win projects, but also build better communities, build better buildings, you know, do everything better. We've already said, hey, we work in a broken industry, and there's a lot of times it's because we don't want to share information, or we're holding back, or We don't have all the information, but we're making assumptions. So I think it's one of those things of build relationships across the board, internally with your company, and also externally with project teams. I am going to move us forward because everyone's here to talk about like, hey, healthcare is a booming market. How do I get more projects and that growth? So we're going to educate people on, let's talk about programming. Programming is that business need of why do you need a renovation, a new medical office building, a new hospital system. So what makes a good program? And I'm going to toss this up and I'm going to ask whoever is willing to put their neck out there on the line of, if you had your magic wand and you could tell a project owner, this makes a good program, what would you tell them?
I'll jump. One that answers the essential business case of the need, right? And it kind of goes to what Trent was saying. If the dartboard's in a dark closet and I'm just throwing, you know, I have no idea what the real target is, there's no way I'm going to hit something. But if the team can have a real frank conversation around what is the true metric that moves this project forward, what is that one pro forma that is essential. So it's that this many med-surg beds and the supporting people for this much dollars, that's the crux of this. That's essential. And then that starts letting everything else be nice to have or varying levels. And so now you've kind of set everybody's focus on what is the true target. Yielding 15 ORs this amount of time. That's the essential piece of this job. And then we can build on what else can bolt on to that.
So, real question, real talk. Of the projects that you get started on or even know about, if you had a guess at percentage, how many of them come in with a good program?
Define good programming. I mean, you mean like realistic?
Realistic.
Yeah. It depends, and I think there are companies, and so companies that are serial builders that start projects, you know, 2 or 3 a month. They have pretty reasonable metrics, and they kind of they know what to expect before they start. Companies or hospitals that build once every 20 years, and everything is a right out. Decisions are tough, and so building that level of trust is tough because they're coming at it as like when I take my car to get it worked on. It's all electronic now, and so as soon as I open the hood, they're going to find something that I'm kind of at their mercy because I come at it from a point of just ignorance. I don't know anything about that. If you build once every 20 years, then you're kind of coming at construction from whatever the last person kind of gave you the business on your kitchen remodel at the house, and you're like, that's the baggage and the sins that our industry drags into that conversation, and so everything's kind of a suspect, and so just different between the client and their expectations and their knowledge set.
Okay, so
Yeah.
Trent, along those lines, how do you react whenever the program evolves?
I throw my hands in the air and go, oh my gosh. Let me back up and answer the question, kind of coming at it from Douglas's angle as well. That the program tends to drive the success in that early stage of design, and how solidified that program is. Whether it's a good program or not, that might not be the question as much as hopefully that was thought through in the business case of looking at the key planning units, the number of beds, the number of ORs, the number of things that are revenue drivers to a hospital that vetted pretty well. And then the square footage that's associated with those spaces, including their support spaces, you know, all of that starts to come together and develop the program. And then from a budgetary standpoint, we start to move forward. And when that program gets upset, it can really throw a wrench in the works. And that comes in kind of different ways. It may not just be the key planning units that somebody says, well, we want another OR, we want to add some more beds. You know, that's maybe a little easier to address. But the pain that is sometimes experienced is in as user group meetings are held and as staff kind of has their input into the design. What was thought to be 300,000 square feet grows to 330,000 square feet. We didn't change the key planning units, but the space grew. And as Douglas said, the serial builders are kind of pretty good about, you know, defining that program. These are the spaces associated with this. This is the size room we're going to build, and that's a much easier, kind of more of a predictable outcome that we get with that. And it can be challenging to kind of keep everyone in check, and that's where good contractors and good design professionals can help with some benchmarking along the way to say, how are we doing in developing this program to keep it within reason and not let our kind of appetite sometimes, or just, you know, desire for better functionality that sometimes doesn't have the return that you wish that it would in terms of looking at the construction cost of that space. And so, you know, pointing that out quickly is how teams are more successful when the program wants to evolve and change, and helping a client to recognize these are great ideas, but let's, you know, that just recognize that what this is doing to you, and we can help them understand what that means in terms of cost, and maybe present other options for them to consider as well. Far too often I see that we get to like the beginning of schematic design, 50% schematic design, and that program still wants to kind of evolve and change. And that is, in my experience, where many projects kind of get upset in that early phase is if that program wants to continue to move. I like to see kind of a good line in the sand that this is our program, this is what we're going to build, and, you know, the massing and kind of those conceptual bubble diagrams start to represent those square footages, and as more lines are drawn in those drawings, formats are developed, you know, everything kind of tracks the way that it should. That's where teams have the best success in maintaining budgets, and that budget's not just the construction side, it also equates to designers that kind of have to spend additional hours redrawing and kind of shuffling things around as the program wants to develop. So upfront time spent in that programming phase is I think, an important part to the success of getting a good foundation for the teams to go and start designing from and building on.
I like that. We have about
the validation of that through the early stages, and because it does start to erode that trust. You have to do extra work. Now it's like, well, what if things are going to change? I'd rather they change as a result of a strategic decision versus just kind of backing into, oh my gosh, what did we? Nobody wants that.
Yeah. We have about 5 minutes left before I get to some of the questions that have started to come in. So again, I'm going to give you a magic wand, and we have been talking about what we want the project owner to know about. We want to ask them questions. Let's flip it around. If you could build your ideal project, what do you wish a project owner would ask you during the pre-construction phase?
That's a great question.
Man, that's a stumper.
I think that the question that I would suggest that owners would make of teams is what's your experience together? You know, going again back to that kind of teamwork. Who do you have each other's back? You know, that is important, and it's important at like every level. in the contracting team. Project managers and superintendents that have done this same thing in a similar fashion, that's an important thing. And architects and engineers, architects and contractors, contractors and subcontractors, I think those are very important things. And that can be, in this industry particularly, where healthcare is we deliver projects across the nation. And so, you go into a new market, you might be dealing with some new consultants, some new subcontractors. And so developing those relationships, might need to happen really quickly. And usually we're kind of aligning ourselves as we go into a new market with the key players in that market already and kind of getting to know them. So, that quick alignment needs to happen. And I think that's the question ultimately, though, is, how is this team going to be able to collaborate? And, the thing that I wish that clients would understand is that cost component is, while it's super important, the way that we're going to be successful in delivering you the best outcome is through that collaboration and teamwork. The numbers are important, but only to a point that we're within an acceptable range. The lowest cost, the lowest fee is maybe not the right decision, because that team is going to make some great decisions along the way that would make up any difference from the team that might have the lowest number, that's never worked together, never produced this type of project together. That's I think we're all guilty of it. I'm not trying to point fingers, that we sometimes look at, hey, that looks like a great value, I'm going to take that one. End of the day, we're disappointed with the outcome. So, I think the trend in the industry I've seen is that evaluation wants to happen, and that probably people are steering away from just numbers, but it still does happen. And recognizing that greater value is sometimes produced in ways that is not the lowest initial price is important.
That's right. Thank you for the time, Trent. I needed it. My answer is very similar, and it goes back to how you started the show, Julie, was what expertise do we bring to the table, right? And so everybody wants to feel like they were brought in for a reason other than we left something out, right? I don't want to be the cheapest thing that you've found. I want to be there because I bring value, and that the end result is that you'll be excited and happy with the product and the capital investment, and we will have relationships for it. So I wish that I would be asked, what value do I bring to the team, and versus what my cheap.
That is true. We have a lot of good questions coming in from the audience. So I still have a list of questions I'd love to ask, but I'm gonna share my time. So the first question that I'm gonna ask is, who are the participants or team members that are part of the healthcare pre-construction project? So I'm gonna say, like, internally, is it just estimating? Do you have schedulers? Do you, like, within your companies, who is part of that team? And then externally, do you have specific subs that you need part of a pre-construction process?
You want me to take it? You want to take it?
You go ahead.
I got it. All right. So we actually challenged ourselves to think about this differently in the last few years. But instead of kind of size fits all, it was really understanding what are the complexities and challenges of this unique project, and then when are those expertise needed in the development of the design and figuring it out. And if you kind of understand those things, then you understand who needs to be involved and when they need to be involved. So our first integrated project, we piled on everybody at the beginning, and we found out that was not very efficient, and it was just a lot of extra people. But both internally and externally, we've gotten a little better. We still aren't great at it, but we've gotten better at really trying to understand what are the unique things for this project, when are those knowledge sets needed and subject matter expert, and onboarding them at the right time in the right way, internal and external, to get to the right answer. So that didn't give you like specific people, because I think it's different on every project. Because if it's a renovation, you don't need a lot of civil, but if it's a greenfield, then figuring out where that thing sits and what its building elevation is pivotal, right? And so the answer is different depending on the need of the project.
Well, and sorry, go ahead, Trent.
Well, I'd add to that, you know, from our internal team, having our operational counterparts sitting at the table with us is important from an early phase. The project manager, the superintendent that are ultimately going to build the job need to be involved in that pre-construction effort. You know, an estimator traditionally is focused on costs, and for the most part, a lot of those folks, that's still what they're best at. The trend has been to kind of build more rounded individuals in at least our company of not just, you know, the traditional estimating tasks, but to be able to manage process and manage people, to be experts in the schedule and all the technology that we're using. But ultimately, you still have, you know, some great minds and the guys that are going to be building that, and the project managers and superintendents, and so having them engaged in that process and helping set up the project the way that they want to build it and their approach is important.
Well, and we had a comment come in about MEP, and the comment was, you know, MEP really does need to be part, like if we're talking about IPD, the integrated project delivery, they need to be brought in at the very earliest stages, because the MEP systems within a healthcare project are nuanced and complex, and you want them to be part of that. So do you agree with that statement? Is it, hey, of all, okay, Trent's giving me a thumb up, so I appreciate the audience member that included that, because again, MEP gets very complex. You want to make sure you have the right systems and everything in place early on in a project. Okay.
I'd say from that programming phase, you know, the latest point in time is maybe the end of programming, because a lot of times as that program is being developed, the MEP disciplines are starting to develop schemes around how are we going to service this, and so those discussions are happening while this program continues to evolve, and so having some at the table from an early phase is, I agree 100%. That's good practice.
Awesome. Okay, how important are conditions of satisfaction in early project decision making?
I think laying those conditions of satisfaction out is important. I think far too often we start down the road without recognizing where we want to get to. You know, we know we're going to build a project, we know we have a budget, but what are the other conditions of satisfaction that we're looking for? So I think that's important. You know, what is the most important thing? You know, the patient tends to be at the top of the list in every discussion we have. But what does that truly mean and equate to is one of those conditions of satisfaction that I think sometimes we miss on, and reminding ourselves along the way what those conditions of satisfaction, those guiding principles of the project, what those things are, that we continually grade ourselves on that, and that we don't just get focused on how fast can we build, how cheap can we build it, but you know, are we hitting the goals of the project in those conditions of satisfaction that were laid out. And you know, every teammate probably needs to have a say in what those conditions of satisfaction are, not just the client, but you know, what makes a successful project for each one of us.
I think you're setting yourself up for rework. We don't understand what defines success in the end, because I mean, the most challenging part of construction usually is guiding through the period of most of design is making big decisions, and so what is the best way to do this. And if you don't understand what is important to the constituency of the project, then you have no way or no filter or prism to force those decisions through, even measure like, is this the right piece, and to challenge on. So if you don't know what the target is, you have no way of knowing is this the right decision. And if we make a bad decision, we're destined to have to redo that at some point, because we're going to get down the road and be like, oh man, we got to unwind this and redo it because something. And so understanding what drives success in the end before you start, while it may feel, like Trent said, it may feel like taking a little extra time because we're all enamored with motion, and that's getting things done. Sometimes it's just motion. And so, and if it's motion in the wrong direction, then you're destined to have to do it twice. And so understanding what our direction before we start.
Okay. I'm going to ask this next question. If you don't give the answer I'm going to throw out my own answer. Besides cost, what qualification do you value most when picking a design assist subcontractor partner on healthcare projects?
So for me, it is, do they match up in value systems to kind of how we, that same value system. So for us, I think for Trent Company as well, it's, I want to make this client and this project as successful as possible because I want to be their first choice on the next one. And so if you can align yourself with trades that are thinking that same way, what is best for the project and what is best for this owner, then you can trust them with that relation. I'm kind of when I've earned a client, I'm trusting that client to somebody else. Okay, here's a little bit of our relationship. I'm letting, and so you don't want to hand that off to somebody that doesn't have the same value system you do. And so to me, that's what I'm looking for. It's just like hiring somebody for your company. Like, I want people that I want to work with that I know I can trust. And so we don't always get that choice or that way. We aren't all, sometimes we have handcuffs and we have to make decisions on other factors and criteria. But if it's left up to me, I'm going to pick the person that I think will handle that project the same way I would.
What about you, Trent?
I think Douglas nailed it. It really is an alignment of values, of approach to client relationships, because subcontractors really are an extension of us. And if they don't perform the way that we would, then our client's not going to be happy, and we don't get invited back to the next job. And it just creates a lot of hardship. And the experience piece is certainly important. Somebody that has built similar projects, understands the healthcare environment, especially when we're going into an existing campus. That's things that have to be had. Those are kind of some non-starters almost. If you're not experienced in that, we might need to look for ways to include some people in some easier projects, if you will, that are healthcare focused, but let them kind of cut their teeth. And we do make efforts to do that. But ultimately, the real kind of driver of the selection is, how are we going to work together? Is this going to be a collaborative? Because there's going to be problems, guaranteed. This is not easy. And how to solve those problems is what makes all the difference. And having somebody that's aligned with you in the approach to that problem solving, that is looking for solutions, not looking to point fingers, is the way that we're all successful. And it's appreciated from bottom to top that we all come away and go, hey, let's get the band back together and do the next one.
Well, you guys kind of gave my answer, but I'm gonna say it anyway. I think anytime you have a teaming partner and it kind of goes back to Douglas, your initial thing about your biggest success of I have a teaming partner that asks me really good questions that make me rethink my approach, that's someone who's also rethinking an approach as well. So I think it's, we're looking for innovative people in our space and people that we can work with, and someone who's also thinking that way and not necessarily there just to take direction. It's a huge help to any type of project. Okay, I think we have time for maybe, well, I think one more, and also timely, and this is an actual question, I'm not making it up. Do your teams use any new technology for estimating?
There's emerging technology that we're always exploring, from AI takeoff tools that are kind of cool, and other things. At the end of the day, technology is only as good as the people that are using it and know what to do with that information. This is my son and I, he didn't listen to my advice and decided to get into construction as well. But we were talking about this the other week, and that technology piece is great, but having people that had known what to do with that information is kind of the bigger battle. Looking at it from a critical kind of experienced eye to say, is this right? And I'll give your company a plug, Julie. Beck Technology has been a partner with us for several years. We collaborated together in some of the development of your software, and having, much like we've been talking here, having a partner that allows for good feedback and is responsive to what we wanted before we ever spend a real penny implementing some of the Beck Technology software. We've been working together for a year plus, giving you feedback and you showing us, hey, what do you think about this? And so a good partner in technology, I think, is one that listens and responds, and adopting that technology and continue to make it better is how we all continue to be successful.
Yeah, I agree. I think estimating is a cool blend of science and art, and the science needs tools and information, right? And so that's the technology. We don't have shovels. We use digital pieces. Those are our tools. And then the data, being able to get the right data to leverage and make better decisions at the right time. So I think that's exactly right. It goes down to the people that are building the tool and the people that are using the tool. And it was, this is a shameless plug, but it's one of the reasons we picked Beck, is because the value system Beck aligned with ours, and we did have access to the decision makers at the company. It's like somebody that could actually listen, and we felt like aligned with us and our mission and our values was cool. And it's in short supply in the software world. Actually, we deal with a lot of pound gorillas tell us to pound sand, even though we're a decent sized contractor. It's having an ear that's synthetic and is rare. So
yep, I think it all goes back to trust. So hopefully that's something that Beck Tech continues to do in the industry, and also hopefully we have also shared some trustworthy items with the audience today. Douglas, Trent, thank you so much for joining me today for this conversation. For anyone that maybe I didn't get to your question, we had a bunch come in, so thanks guys. Feel free to reach out to me, and I can follow up and make sure those gets answered. And thank you everyone for joining us today on the webinar.